Next up is harness the power of Nx workspaces.
So I go over here. There's no room because of the plant. We're going to talk about how we are using Nx in different projects. Both Bjarke and me, Tim, are consultants. So we work with different companies in different domains and etc. And we migrated many of our customers to use Nx. If some of you have joined these meetups earlier, you might have heard Nx several times. But let's dive into it. I think if you summarize me and Bjarke, we are almost alike. Bjarke is just a bit older. I think that's the main difference. And yeah, we work at Trifork, big company, at least if you count on number of employees, but I'm more like a startup. So each division of Trifork is more like a small company, helping the local companies around that office. Yeah, let's skip those. Yes, let's talk about the 5 cases where we migrated some of our customers to use Nx. Some of them starting from very small and maybe don't even have a project. Some of them had a big project but wanted to migrate. And some of them even had their own kind of monorepo, maybe with some old tooling, etc. But maybe one key point, if some of you are considering migrating, that's also the selling part. Because it's not only the developers that need to be sold on the idea of migrating, because it will take some hours to implement. Then of course you need to tell your CFO or whoever it is that manages the money. So now hopefully you'll have some more ammunition. But let's take one of the first examples. We still have Kingspan as a customer. We had a big app for them that we did. It's a big calculator app that calculates how much power you would save if you upgraded your varmerørsledninger, whatever that's in English. And yeah, that's a big calculator for that. And that's all good. And now they wanted some new other apps that's in the same domain, but they want them as completely standalone. So we didn't really have a way to share the components, and it's supposed to be different apps, etc. So even though the project wasn't that big, we actually migrated to Nx. So now we have 2 apps, completely different purposes, but they're styled alike, and some of this calculator stuff is also shared. And they can deploy them individually, and it's just way easier to start new projects. So there's already lots of new ideas for other small tools that they would like, and we can certainly give them that for only a percentage of the development cost is only a percentage compared to previously. And each time you add a new project or whatever the ideas they get up with, we actively maintain all the shared logic. So all of the apps becomes better each time. If they were just in different repos, that's not as nice and easy to do. Yes, I think that's just sum up of one of the small changes in setup we did. A bigger one is a tool or internal code name we refer to as Leopard. It's one huge React project, as in it's 5-6 years old and actively being developed on in all those years. Tailor-made for one domain, one customer, and everything is just custom. But because this is now such a big, nice tool, we want to convert it into something generic so we can start reselling it. There's lots of classified domain in the code. So there's this struggle that we need to do something generic while still developing the ultra custom one, but also be able to, in the near future, actually release this as a more generic platform. So what we did in this scenario was to pull all the shared code, and shared code is the components that they don't know anything about the data. They know what they expect. So if it's a table, well, give me a list of columns and give me the data and I will show it to you. Give me a map. I don't care where in the world or what polygons or whatever you show on the map. I'll just show a map. All those kind of components, put them into shared. And then we had the shared actually on a completely different repo, because we couldn't really reuse we use GitLab for the private stuff, but we can't reuse that to our data platform. So we also have two different repos for the shared ones. Then each time we build something in this shared space, it's bundled and everything as an NPM package, still privately within GitHub, and then just installed as was it any other package or private setup. And to make that work, we did a custom generator in NX that makes it easy to basically bootstrap these packages to make them deployable on GitHub private repository with the correct tags, etc. So that's some of the nice things about NX, that if you have some specific use cases, even if it's not very big setup or anything, it's quite easy to do these generators yourself. But one thing to keep in mind when you will put it out into two repos is that you have the same requirements as if the code was entirely public. You need to have some idea of when are you actually breaking the interface. You also need to be able to test your code without putting it into whatever, or put it into Leopard, for instance. So what we have is a storybook. So the shared repo is all of the components and the storybook that can show all of these components. And the theming and the data and whatever, that's just some fake data in that storybook, and we can use it in the real life in the other project. But with all of this setup, we also have all of the tough components. They're out in shared components. So now it's actually way easier to start developing this data platform that's much more generic, because that's the goal that we have, that we shouldn't know anything about the data. That's just metadata. So just show it. And we're quite far on that journey. Yeah, so we have 3 apps, the Leopard, the upcoming data platform, and then the storybook to show those apps. And then 12 packages and 6 developers working on all of this Gatehouse.
And then we had a case with Gatehouse, specifically a maritime, where they have an old front end that's deployed on-prem for their different clients, basically like a giant map with lots of different features on what to show on this map. It's written in EXT.js, and it was becoming basically impossible to maintain. There are 1.5 developers on it currently, so they needed something new that could allow them to work faster in the future. And so we had a lot of talking with them, and they wanted something where they could feature flag stuff based on where it was deployed. There was also some talk about using micro front ends, and basically we ended up recommending NX because they are, I wrote 2 developers. I think it's 1.5, both in the room, and we decided to basically rewrite the whole thing in React. And then because we also knew there was possibilities of some smaller one-off apps, that allowed us to introduce some shared components that could be used by these. For instance, we wrote a wrapper for open layers with React that we put in a shared component, so we can use that both for this one-off app that needs very little from the map. And then it was also, like I said, it's a very small team maintaining both these apps. And we basically recommended not to go with micro front end because 1-2 developers, micro front ends, we would need a lot more to just host this solution. And so we also needed to be able to do the deployments in places where there's no internet access. So it didn't really give much benefit. So we ended up doing, right now it's 2 apps and I think 13 packages or something like that. Is also, they can share API packages as well, which is really nice. Then we did the same thing for Nuclear. They have many repos. Basically, their philosophy is every app they deploy is a repo. They have one repo though where they deployed 4 apps with a landing page. So there's a landing page, which was a single app, and then they had 3 other apps that basically used the same APIs to present views in different ways. This for this basically mortgage stuff. If you're using Totalkredit, they developed all the internal tools for when you get a mortgage, remortgage, refinancing, all that stuff. So this repo was basically a mono repo. It was using Lerna, it was using Create React App, and then CSS modules. This caused some issues. They had some self-built scripts to combine these multiple apps into one deployment, and then they had a few very large shared packages. I think they had 4. One was basically, it was called shared, and it had everything. It had UI components, it had API fetching components, it had some testing in it, and so it caused quite a few issues with tree shaking. Every app had a lot of unnecessary stuff in it. From a developer standpoint, it was absolutely horrible to check out somebody else's code. So if you had a PR and you had to try some things, before you could even start the app, you had to build the whole repo for 5-6 minutes. And so that meant you didn't do that. You reviewed the code and I was like, it looks good enough. And also if you had to do any changes in these shared packages, it was very cumbersome because you had to compile that package before it was then brought in to the apps. And then furthermore, each app had its own set of dependencies, which meant you could be running one version of React in one and another version in another, and it was basically a nightmare. So like I said, they ended in free apps with different data, basically using the data for different purposes, and then a landing page. Then they had some API that was shared across all the apps, and a lot of shared components. So with NX, we managed to be able to basically, from you get the code, run npm install, and then you could just start the app, and it would just work. You would be running within 15 seconds. And so that meant you could easily check out a branch, npm install, and then run it. We also, with NX integrated monorepo, we basically were forced to have only one version of every dependency, which does mean that whenever we have to upgrade, we have to make sure it works well in all 3 apps. But the headache it's a lot less headache of knowing what version is then actually used, because we were basically forced to use yarn resolutions in order for fixing issues before that. So right now they have 4 apps and then 5 shared packages, but they are moving into we're looking into splitting up this big, large shared components into more focused packages. Another really nice benefit of NX is that now you can, if you have an import, you can command click it and go straight to where that code is before you were put into the dist folder and had to then find your own way from there. They're very happy with increased, what do you call it? Developer experience. Yeah. And then once I had shown what that could do, they have this design system, which is an open source UI component library that they use. It's called RMW, basically wrappers around material design web components. So they use the official material design web components library as foundation, and then they add some wrappers onto it so that you can use it with React in a nice way. Then this repo had some minimal Lerna. Basically, Lerna was used to update the version in every package. That was it. Then they used some very custom build scripts and also Create React App rewired, which meant they were fiddling with Webpack in order to handle deployment properly or publishing these packages properly. Each component is also published independently, and then they have one shared everything package. So if you want everything, you just npm install that one. And the goal was to not have any breaking changes. That's still a work in progress, but we have 43 published packages, and we have 2 helper packages for doing the README, and then we have 1 app that is used for documentation purposes. While we were redoing this, we also found a lot of cyclic dependencies. So cleaning those up helped a little bit with bundle size. And yeah, so I wrote free developers, but that's based on who are actively maintaining the repo. This is still work in progress, and there are some issues with CSS that I am still trying to figure out. But they are, for this, it was very nice with the whole dependency graph of NX, which really helped me figure out like what packages depend on what.
So to sum it all up, the three main reasons we see to migrate, it changes your mindset. Instead of just we are building one big application and we just need a new component that does this, etc. You just end up creating lots of one-off components. And yeah, you get something working nicely and it's great. And the week after and the month after, it's where did all these files come from? It's just one big mess if you just keep adding these one-offs. So with this mindset of we have something called packages. When I start developing something, is this a package? Maybe it is, but just that thought really think about, well, how should I actually structure my code? So whether you use NX or some other monorepo setup, it doesn't really matter, but just the mindset of we have a way of actually structuring some components that can be reused, and the less code that's in there, the less code we can reuse. So that's something to have in mind, and that's a good way to sell to whatever your management likes to hear. Easier to scale. Well, the more you put in those pages, the more love and energy there is then in those, the more components you have to build upon. So these small new ideas that sometimes comes from management or whoever, it's just way easier to bring something quickly to life. And even with building something that's big, you have something that's easily maintained because all of these packages, they just become more and more stable because you use them in so many different ways. And when you do all of these packages, well, you put the tests closer to where that, so if you build a table component or whatever, well, the tests for that component is usually next to it. In that way, your components also become much more structured. Then we use NxMigrations a lot. It's a thing in NX that can help you maintain your dependencies and your configurations. So it's not just running yarn upgrade latest. It's actually, well, it's upgrading Storybook to a latest version, and Storybook also has some new configuration. Then it goes to each of your packages, updates the configuration, so whatever is the new way to do it. So in that way, it's just easier to stay on top of dependencies, especially if it's some projects that maybe is not being worked on every week or month or whatever. Then you can almost do these NxMigrate latest, and you're sure you're actually up to date. Try doing that with a config. That's hard. Yes. So lots of small wins. It doesn't have to be a huge NX setup as here at Track Unit. Even small teams can actually benefit from this. If you see the project you're working on, either we are going to make multiple apps that have something shared, or we know, well, this is going to be a long runner. Consider NX already at that step. Yeah, and some of the stuff you are struggling with now, to actually make it easier to migrate to NX. If you have that thought sometime, try to make your build pipeline as simple as possible, because the less code that's in your build pipeline, the easier it is to change again. So if you're thinking, I just need this node script to build this and move these files, and then it's going to be a headache to replace it. So that's just something to have in mind. That's it for us.